Hello, everyone. Today I'll be going over how to implement gas into your project. Now, I know it's pretty hard to actually get started with that right off the bat, so I've made your life a bit easier by providing some files to work with right off the bat, so you don't have to create them on your own. Um, However, they are not set to be bug-free. Uh, they definitely probably will have some issues down the line that you would most probably face. So I would primarily probably use these files as something to prototype with rather than develop a fully fledged game with. So just a heads up with that. I will also showcase right now how you can pretty easily incorporate them into your own project. I also have a quick README here. If you decide to skip this part, you can just read this file here and get things started. But for how I will do it is basically uh, bringing up your IDE and getting the folders up here. Currently, I'm using a Rider instead of Visual Studio, but you could use Visual Studio as well. It works just as good. What I would do here is to find all of the files, actually. So before we even open Rider, let's just close it. I'll remove the idea here. You could pretty much go into, also the folder names. If you're unhappy with those, you could also rename the folders however you like to make it make more sense. But what I'm gonna do is basically rename the files from my project to the new project I will be using it on. So for my case, I'll name it after the new project I'll make. Let's just call it Loot Chest Tutorial. So it's LCT, all capital. I can pretty much, or we can pretty much just do this for all of them. That's one file. I'll also speed this process up so you can just follow along as I do. It's pretty straightforward. Okay, and now for the private folder. Okay, I think we're pretty much done with that. Now let's just open Rider here. Okay. So with the Rider, there's actually a way to rename everything pretty quickly. So to find and replace all mentions of my project, you pretty much, in the Rider at least, I don't know how it is in Visual Studio, you could press Control Shift H, and then we could say, let's replace it with a new name called Loot Chest Tutorial. And you can see it's quite a lot. Okay, let's replace all 93 occurrences and across 11 files in total. I think we're about done with this now. We can put exit here and we can pretty much just, or for my case, I can delete idea because I do not need it. I'll copy these two files, however, and I'll come back later when we need it. For now, I'll open Epic Games. Go to library, and let's create a new project. Okay, so heading over here, it's going to be probably a bit different to your engine version because 5.6 introduces a bunch of new things. If we go, for example, into the third person here, you have different variants you can choose from. Now, I believe if you put none here, it will just be the basic third person template. But you can also choose here what variant you want to include, like, for example, the combat variant, platformer, side scroller. Uh, those are going to be similar to what you've probably seen in the Unreal Engine YouTube channel that they showcase there. But for our case, we need it to be a C++ project. And for the project, we're going to name it LCT, similar to the renaming. And yeah, that's pretty much it. And then you can create your project. After this boots up, I'll also show how you can turn your Blueprint project into a C++ one so you can follow these steps without needing to create a new project. Okay. So if you have an existing project, all you would need to do is to go into Tools and then New C++ class. You can pretty much just leave it as none. Next, name it like temporary class, make it public, and then create. And that would pretty much convert your blueprint into C++ and it will compile for you. But this project currently is a C++ project, so what we need to do is to go into plugins. We need to search for game play, and that would essentially expose some of these gameplay ability plugins that we need. So we need this one. This one as well. We just press yes on this. Um, and then the modular gameplay as well. And of course the game features. And I think that would be pretty much it if I didn't miss anything else. We can also check enhanced input, that's also enabled. Good. We can go ahead and restart. Okay, so when you boot up again, you'll see that the settings do not include entry for asset of type game feature data. It's pretty easy if you just scroll more. You can add an entry here with just a click. And that should be good to go now. And if we press add in the plugins window, we can now see that we have the game features content only and game features with C++. Now this depends on pretty much what you want to do here. if you want to create new C++ classes within your game feature, you could pick this one. But for my case, I already have the classes that I need to work with, so I'm just going to keep it content only. And for this tutorial, since it's a loot chest tutorial, I'm going to name it Game Feature Interaction Core. And we can go ahead and create it. And now I believe if you press active, it won't do anything. I believe we need to put it registered, then active again, and then press. All right, you need to save it first. There we go. Now it's pretty much active. We can close this now. We can also head back into OWL, and then we can find the plugins folder here. If you double click it, you see the Game Feature Interaction Core folder, and you have your data asset here. We'll get back to what needs to be inputted into the actions list later on. But for now, we just need to close our project because there are still some things that needs to be done. We go into the folder in which you create your project in. Let me go ahead and close Epic Games. Actually, I don't need it anymore. And also Rider. Oh, okay. And if I go into LCT, I'll see it over here. Now, since we're going to modify things a bit, it's going to require a couple of steps. But first, there are some things I would like to copy over from my project exemplary test. In here, if I go into source, my project, and then we see my project build.cs. Double click that. We need to copy over these module targets to be able to build. I will include them in the README document for these files that I will be sharing, so you don't have to manually type them if you don't want. Let's just close this now. We can go back to the project folder. Currently, what we don't need is the .vs, .binaries, derived cached, intermediate, and saved. We'll generate them again. It's not such of a big issue, but we should go into the source folder and find the build target file. And in here, under UMG, we'll paste them. We can double check as well if there's a duplicate here. For example, enhanced input is already in it. We don't need it anymore. And this looks pretty okay. We can save that and close out of this. We can go back to LCT. And now we can open up the folder, like these files we just renamed. We can Control C, copy them, go back into the project source folder, LCT, and then here, usually you wouldn't have a public and private folder because you haven't generated a C++ class yet. But if you did, you'd already find them here. So you could just paste them here. It should be pretty safe to do. Now we can go back to the U project, right click, generate Visual Studio project files. Okay, and then let's open up Rider. And under game, you'll find your project here. And this might take a while until it can load up the project entirely. So I will speed this process up a bit. Okay, so now we can just double check if we go into the source, LCT, and we can find these private and public folders are now seen by Rider, which is good. We can also double check the build file, and we see that the things we've already made here are present. And let's try to build it and see what happens. Great. Looks like it went smoothly. All right, let's try to launch it. Okay, now if you go into the plugins folder, you'd see you don't have it anymore. That is because the first time, I believe, when you relaunch the editor, after you've added the Game Future plugin, it will be inactive. So you can pretty much go into here and search, or into the plugins window and search for the plugin we made. So for me, it's Game Feature Interaction Core, and we can enable it. And then we need to restart again. Now it should be visible here, and you have access to it. Now I'll also show, just in case, if I close the project again, open up Rider, boot up the project again from Rider, and the plugin is still active. Great. Okay, now we can actually get started. So first things first, we need to go into content. And since this is the new starter project template, we have a variety of choices to make. You could choose the third person, the combat, or the platformer, whichever you desire. But for this purpose, I'm just going to use the third person. And each of these actually have their own player character. If you go into Blueprint, you can find BP, combat character, and so on. But we're just going to focus on the third person character in the third person template. Open it up. And this is probably also pretty different. You don't have like a big in play or anything showcased here. You just have a event possessed, and then casting to the player controller, and then a switch to Android, iOS, or Windows. Or this is pretty much just a check to see if you get the PC controls or the mobile controls. But we could do here is, if it's either or, we don't really care. We just want to say, if you boot up the game, it doesn't matter which it is. We want to get the game framework component. And then we would need to add receiver. And then for the receiver, we'll just input self here. Now, if you have a different layout in mind for the mobile version, you can just put it into the PC pin. But if you want to include it into the mobile, you can also do that. Works just as fine. But since I'm not going to be supporting mobile, I'll just disconnect it for my project. Also, really important to note is that we actually need to add a ability system component here so that we can be able to use the gameplay abilities that we grant the player. Okay, so now we can compile, save the character, close it, and go into plugins. And here we could make a new folder. Let's just name it the same, GFI core. And then within here, we will firstly create two folders, one called GA for gameplay abilities and one for the input, for all your input actions. Okay, so now let's just create the components. Under all classes, you could search for the name of the component. For me, it's LCT, so the project name. And then you can scroll down and you can find them. If it's pretty hard to find, you can also just type binding component and you have them right over here. We'll go ahead and create both of them. Let's call it ability binding component. And let's create the other one. Be ability input binding component. And now for these, especially for the ability binding component, it grants the abilities, effects, attributes from your ability set asset to the pawn's ability system component. And that usually runs once in begin play, so your pawn actually has the abilities. And for the other one, the ability input binding component essentially binds your input configs, input action to either input driven or event driven gas paths based on the same ability set tags. And I'll get to that soon. This also lives on after granting, so it can listen for key presses and tells gas press this button or like fire this gameplay event. We can open this up and you can find that it takes the input config and the ability sets. We can place it here for now. And the ability binding component, you can see that it takes ability sets to grant, but we don't have anything yet. So let's create them. Let's go into firstly making the setup. So in the GA, let's create a new blueprint class and search for gameplay ability altogether, scroll down, and then you can find this one. Let's call it GA interact. Double press to open. So the setup works as following. If you have just the event activate ability, you don't really need to specify tags in this list. However, you could probably change this one instance per actor if you'd like. But for the event activate ability from event, actually listens or takes a trigger tag. And I'll show you how to set up both of these events depending on what you want. For now, I believe we could make a placeholder print string. We could say ability activated from let's see this one. And we can pretty much copy this one, place it here, and let's call this event activate ability from event. Let's remove the event from the beginning from both of them to make it a bit more clear. And end ability to end it. Okay, so we have this figured out. Let's go back a folder and then into inputs. We'll create a new one and we'll call it interact. And we'll create a new input and call it IA interact, and we'll leave it as is. Let's create a new input mapping contest, call it IMC, and then for this video, I'll just call it the same as the plugin, GFI core. Also, just to know that this is the plugin interaction, we could also just underscore and then say game feature to differentiate it from the template interaction IA. So now when we go into the IMC, if we type interact, we'll see we have two. So we know this one is in the game feature plugin, so we'll choose that. And for the key binding, just choose anything that you think isn't being used. For now, I'm pretty much guessing E is not being used. So hopefully the template isn't using that right now. For the triggers, let's choose pressed, but later on in the video, I'll swap to hold and release because that will be more handy for the interaction ability. Threshold looks good. We could overwrite the behavior settings, choose player mappable keys, and we can, doesn't really matter what you name it here, but you could say interact for all of them, should be fine. So let's close this one. Let's back up to the KFI core folder. And let's make a data asset. Similar to the components, it should be pretty easy to find them. Oh, let's just cancel to make it even more obvious. So the data asset, again, at the top right, my project is named LCT. So if I search for LCT, I can find both the ability set and the input config. So let's choose the input config first. DA input config and another DA LCT or LCT ability set DA ability set. So for the input config, all you need to do is to add your IMC we just created and the input actions. is also the interact input action we created recently. And for the input actions, I already have a set of tags I've already created, but I'll go ahead and delete them. So for the GFI core, I'll delete the tag. Oh, right. Delete tag, and then the ability as well. Delete tag, and then delete this one as well. Let's just save all, and now we can create some new tags. So I'll go with ability, default gameplay tags, and then I'll add a new. I'll press this downward arrow and add a subtag and call it interact. And I'll select it. So let's close out of the input config and then go into the ability set. This ability set has two different fields you can fill out, as well as the effect field and the attribute field, but I won't go into details into those, mostly just the abilities and the event. But if we start with abilities, we can see that it takes an ability. We can place the one we already created, interact, and the input tag should be the same. So ability interact. So now, if we go into ability binding, we will choose our ability set. We'll save that. And then in the ability input binding component, for the input config, we'll choose DA input config and the ability set, the same ability set we chose for the other component. So now we can also close this component. We can go up a folder to our game feature data asset. And just a reminder, when you add stuff, it always needs to be not active. So I believe even loaded could work, but I always use registered. And then I add a new action and use a component fragment. And then in here, the actor class, we want the third person character. And in the component class is the component we want to attach to the actor class. So for the component class, we can choose the binding component. I always like to go with the input bindings first, but it doesn't really matter which one you choose. And for the character, oh, clear. You could go find your character this way, third person, blueprint, select the third person character, and then press the left arrow to select it into the field. Or you could essentially just search for the third person character. Two different ways, but both of them work depending on how you like to do it. And let's go for the other component. We'll do the same setup. So the third person character, and the binding and the ability binding component. So that should be it. Okay, so back to the activate ability and activate ability from event. If we leave event tags empty, but keep the ability interact within the input tag, the activate ability should fire. And that would also not require essentially any tags to be filled out inside the ability. So if we try it out, oh, yeah, forgot to put it as active. Sorry about that. There you go. Ability activated from activate ability. And if we want to activate ability from event, it's pretty straightforward as well. You could uh, you should remove the ability interact and add event tags instead. And that is the same tag we created. And then going back into GA interact, we need to add ability triggers. And if we expand that, we have a trigger tag. I could say interact. This should essentially fire a ability from event. Yes, so as you can see, ability activated from activate ability from event. So you can choose essentially which event you want to fire from based on the setup. But yeah, that's the core setup. Now that we have the base functionality up and running, we'll be creating our game feature. And for reference, we're going to use the Stellar Blade item interaction or like pickable loot interaction, as well as the chest interactions. Not the puzzle chest, but mostly the hold and release chests you can find throughout the level. And as an example, here is a example gameplay video I captured. So this is pretty much what we're going to try to recreate as close as possible. And here, if you hold the button, it will try to give you a progress bar until it finishes, and then when it finishes, it will open the chest. And then once it opens, it spews out a bunch of VFX and loot that kind of pops up into the air and then into the ground where you can pick up. And as the interaction says, if you can continuously acquire items. So I think that's pretty cool to try to achieve as well.